everyone. I'm Kyle Kittleson with MedCircle. Welcome to our live class. Dr. Ramani is here with us, A Sight for Sore Eyes. Dr. Ramani, thank you for being here.
Well, I appreciate that, Kyle. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, of course, this class filled up very, very quickly,
Oh,
and we
good.
had a lot of people interested in this topic of being empathic and interacting with a narcissist. I'm going to give people just 60 seconds here to come in, but as you guys are joining us live, a reminder that MedCircle is not a treatment service and does not aim to replace or replicate treatment in any way. MedCircle live sessions and MedCircle live classes are for educational purposes only. Dr. Ramani, certainly the narcissism expert. Why is empathy and people who identify as empathic, why are they having a more difficult time, it seems, handling the narcissists in their lives?
So it is, I mean, empathic people and narcissists so sadly find each other. And so let's start by talking about empathy first, because empathy very much is on a continuum, right? Now, there are people who have low or no empathy. These are our narcissists and our psychopaths and just general mean, difficult people. But as you keep going higher on empathy, there is a tipping off point where somebody who has such an overwhelming amount of empathy could actually put themselves in a risky position. They are so invested in understanding someone else's point of view and being present with them and feeling like, well, if I only did more for them and I could do more for them, I want to be present for them. So empathy, but here's where it gets interesting for me, Kyle, is that to me, empathy is not foolishness. Okay. Empathy to me is a very, very human, necessary, compassionate, pro-social state to be in. It means that you care enough about other people to listen to them. You care enough about other people to understand them. You care enough about other people to at least want to hear their point of view, even if you don't agree with it. And above all else, you are also self-reflective about your impact on other people. So you stop and say, maybe I shouldn't say that because it might hurt someone, or let me find a way to say that, or let me be aware because this person's telling me a problem. Maybe this is a good time for me to put my phone down and not be distracted. Empathy is a sense of awareness. So I think what ends up happening is when a very empathic person meets a narcissist, they engage in, what do I say, the four most dangerous words you can have: benefit of the doubt. We came up in another MedCircle session. Those are very dangerous words. And people who are empathic always give second chances. They always give people the benefit of the doubt. And where it gets tricky, Kyle, is that because more than a few narcissists have very difficult backstories, childhoods that might have been characterized by all kinds of adverse experiences, including trauma, abuse. They didn't have an easy run of it early in life, and that actually can beget a narcissistic personality, or they may sell that story even if it's not true. An empathic person, upon hearing that kind of story, will feel a lot of empathy and feel like, I shouldn't walk away from this person. They need someone to be there for them. And the narcissist will take advantage of that.
Are we born empathic, or is it learned?
I think actually we're born incredibly selfish because all we want is somebody to feed us and change our diapers. And
Yeah.
empathy actually is born out of many important experiences we have in childhood. Our brains have there's a part of our brain that subserves empathy. It's that important a function to human survival. Okay.
What does
And
that mean, subserves
so in
empathy?
other words, that empathy, like the ability to recognize faces, the ability to emotionally interact with people, that's a part of the brain, a structural area of the brain that will light up in people when they're engaged in an empathic interchange. We see that particular area of the brain, for example, in people who have psychopathy, who are psychopaths, not as activated. They just don't have natural empathy. It doesn't come to them naturally. And what we need is more research really capturing how this area of the brain works in people who are narcissistic as well. It's just expensive, difficult research to do. But what gets interesting is that in terms of us being born with it, we are born into a relationship. We're born into a relationship with a mother or a father or a caregiver, if you will. And from that person who attends to us and is aware of us and is consistent with us and helps us feel safe, that's the slow birth of empathy. As the child gets older, they're taught things like you have to wait your turn. We need to ask another person how their feelings are. Their parent asks the child, what are you feeling? Okay, tell me your feelings. And what the tricky mistake that many parents make is they infuse their emotions into the child. And what I mean by that is, a simple example would be a child comes up to a parent notices a child maybe crying or sad sitting in the house. And the parent goes up to the child and says, "Hey, what's up, buddy?" And the kid says, "Mommy, I'm sad." And mommy says, "Oh, mommy is so sad now." So now mommy has made that hers instead of saying, "Sweetie, sit down and tell me about this. Are you okay?" I can't tell you how many parents make their kids' sad mood about them. Now the child starts getting confused on the idea of self and other emotion. And so there's a fair amount of confusion there. So yeah, I would say, and I've said this in the past on other MedCircle videos, probably to me personally, this is an opinion, the single most important function of parenting is to cultivate empathy in your child.
Mhm.
And you've got a window in which to do that. Because if you don't get that done by the time as the child's around somewhere between 7 and 10 years old, you're sunk. That window kind of starts to close. And so in terms of the impact a parent can have on a child, and if you look at some of the neuroscience research, and a person who's done a magnificent job of laying this out is Dr. Robert Sapolsky. He does a fantastic job of laying this out in his book, Behave, where he really talks about how adolescent brains, the way they develop, they're kind of wonky when it comes to empathy. There's a self-serving bit to it, and adolescents are actually a bit more empathic when it comes to their peers, but not necessarily other people outside of that network. So they can come off as sort of mean and harsh, and how we think of teenagers sometimes, but they're not fully there. Empathy is not fully cooked, as it were, until we get into young adulthood. And then I think, unfortunately, the ship has now sailed, and the ability to do much more shaping around that, a little limited, depending on the individual.
Excellent. We have a lot of questions from our live viewers today, so I'm going to get right into those. If you do have a question for Dr. Ramani, please use the Q&A box below, and certainly provide details, but the shorter you can make your question, the better. Let's go to our first question. This attendee asks, if you're an empath and had a long-term relationship that ended after 14 years with someone who is narcissistic, and you share a child who is now 17, what is the best approach outside of staying as far away as possible to deal with them?
How old is the child?
17.
17. Okay. And how long was the relationship?
14 years.
Okay. So I would say that it is, I think that by dint of being someone who is so empathic, you probably ended up being able to endure that relationship maybe more years than another person would. So this was probably a very difficult space. As I always tell people in these relationships, empath, no empath, it doesn't matter. You can follow this guidance. You've got to have realistic expectations. And I'd say somebody who's very empathic, it's hard for them because they really want to believe in the goodness of people. Right. And so the challenge, and that's the problem, is that I get it. And that's lovely, but you're going to have to learn to turn that switch off here. And so it's about managing expectations and doing that radical acceptance of this pattern does not change. So you do what you need to do in terms of documentation, making sure you communicate with your 17-year-old in a way that your 17-year-old feels like they can talk about their feelings, that you never throw the other parent under the bus, but you also don't enable the other parent. It's about, like I always say, it's like this razor sharp kind of tightrope walk between retaining an appropriate amount of compassion for the child's co-parent without enabling them, and also not falling into the abyss of sort of, again, of just like giving into them, but also setting boundaries. And the narcissist never honors the boundaries. So it's very frustrating. That's why those realistic expectations really, really matter. And it's very important also to not personalize it. Them not behaving well is not you, it's them. And don't make it about you. It's like this, they're not wired for this. And I think many times people who are empaths, well, maybe I'm not doing it right. You're doing it just fine. They aren't ever going to come over to your side of the street. So please let go of that or you're going to exhaust yourself.
Yes. Next question. Can an empathic child be raised to be a narcissist if they're raised by their narcissistic father. This child is 16 years old.
If this 16-year-old, if this parent is experiencing their 16-year-old as an empathic person and they feel solidly in their child's empathy, I think they're going to be okay. I think that it is very, very, because it'd be one thing if they're saying, I have a 16-year-old child who is a handful. They're spending time with a narcissistic partner, and it is just, and it is getting worse and worse. That would be a different story. But the nice thing about having an empathic 16-year-old is that it's hard to break that of someone. I think, in fact, I would say to this parent, my bigger concern for you would be anxiety in your child, that your child may feel anxious, especially since they're empathic, because they're with a narcissistic parent who may be behaving badly. They don't know how to understand their parents' behavior, and they may even be justifying it. So your child, your 16-year-old child, may be at greater risk of struggling with guilt and anxiety. And those are the things I would tell this parent to be looking out for. If this parent, though, encounters antagonistic, difficult patterns in their 16-year-old child, then I would say, then you want to set the boundaries. You do want to also understand there almost needs to be a washing out period after they've been with their narcissistic parent, and see if they sort of recalibrate once they're back with you.
Excellent. Really, really good. This next question says, hello, Dr. Ramani. So thrilled to be here with you both. My question as an empath coming out of a 20-year narc marriage is how to come to terms with how someone is capable of hurting someone to the degree that they do: cheating, lying, abuse.
So the part of the best way to understand this is to understand some of the architecture of narcissism. Obviously, I could talk 7 hours on that. I would try to make it in just a couple of,
You have
couple
talked
of
7
thoughts.
hours.
I have talked 7 hours about it. But I think that part of it is understanding it. Here you have somebody with a very insecure core. Okay, their egos are incredibly fragile. So every behavior they engage in, every lie, every deceit, every bit of arrogance is all about protecting that fragile ego and putting out this false image of whatever their greatness is to the world. These are people who are incapable of regulating frustration, disappointment, any of those negative emotional states that would somehow show their defects to the world. And once you can understand it like that, they have absolutely no capacity to see, understand, or care about the inner world of another human being. The challenge is for people is that, well, maybe, is it me? It's not you. They don't care about anybody. They do not care about anybody else. It is all about them because they're so fragile. Every bit of psychological energy they have is entirely turned inward to protect themselves. So there's no space in that. If I'm always looking like this, I can't look at this. And so they just don't care because there's no, one of the most important ways to view narcissism is that they view other human beings through what I call an utilitarian lens, the same way I use this teacup. I don't worry myself about this teacup unless I'm drinking out of it. When I'm not drinking out of it, I put it on my desk and I forget about it. When I want my tea, it's very useful to me. When I don't want my tea, I don't think about it. That's how they view people.
Ooh, excellent. How do you not get that? That is very good. This next question is very long. I'm going to shorten it just a little bit. This person's asking, how do you stop questioning yourself? When they were raised, their dad would berate them for being too shy, not being confident enough. Now they're an adult and they want to, this person says, now as an adult, I would like to feel more secure in myself and my thoughts. But all the depictions they see of confidence is being very loud and brash, and they don't want to be that way. Mm-hmm. So how would you recommend this person start to address the question of how do you stop questioning yourself?
So part of it is that you start experimenting with your own reality. Because what I'm hearing a lot here with this person is that they've stopped accepting their own reality. And it was because it was taken away from them when they were a kid, that they're constantly, it was being questioned. You were told, you're not doing this right. This is not right. And they're probably being gaslighted or having their reality denied for their entire childhood. If you're gaslighted for long enough, you completely stop believing in yourself. So that idea of second guessing yourself as an adult is one of the most classical pieces of having had a narcissistic parent. So what ends up happening is, I often tell people, is what the most important thing you could do is find a sounding board that is willing to hear you and listen to you and hear your reality. Now, in some cases, that's as simple as going into therapy, but with a therapist who is willing to be genuine and present and hear your reality without questioning it. The other way is to develop friendships. I wouldn't even say go all in on the intimate relationship, because that's always a dicier space, but friendships where you can share about yourself and that friend gets it. They're like, I am so sorry this is happening to you. Instead of saying, well, they are your dad. So no gaslighty friends. Like, it's really about, and that's why therapy with a good therapist is a great place to start, because in theory, that person shouldn't gaslight you and should really hear your reality and say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. How do you feel about that? And help you understand how that has affected you. Then it's really about almost like these little experiments in trying out your reality. Like, just saying, okay, I give people this exercise 4 or 5 times a day. I want you to stop and ask yourself, how do I feel right now? Like, out loud, how do I feel right now? And you might say, I feel peaceful, or I feel angry. Because no, but you don't need an audience. You're doing this alone. I know that sounds odd, but you're doing it alone. Because what you're starting to do is give yourself permission to identify your own emotions without anyone censoring you. And the first time you say, how do I feel right now? I don't know. That's not an acceptable answer. You know how you feel. There's something bottling that up. So I want you to push it out and say, I don't know. No, I don't know. How do you feel? Like, yeah, I guess I feel okay. And then it takes a while before you start trusting that. Do it out loud 4 or 5 times a day. Set alarms if you need to, because by doing that and by identifying your own feelings, that is a small step towards calibrating back to your own reality and giving it voice. Because what this person is writing is so classical of people who have narcissistic parents, and they so don't know. And I see that someone made a comment, we don't even know our own feelings. I get that. So it's like, I'm not sure what to call this. You can even say out loud, like, I feel okay, but I'm a little worried. That's okay. That's okay. Like, it's almost like learning a new language or speaking your own feelings, right? Yeah. Like, I don't know how to say that, but I'm going to say it with a funny accent. That's okay. Just try and say it, but say it out loud and do it by yourself for a while until you start feeling more comfortable. But I got to tell you, I have worked with so many survivors of narcissistic abuse from their parents in therapy. And one of the things I see they have the most trouble doing, if I say, how are you feeling? Their answer is always, I don't know.
Because their reality has been questioned for maybe decades.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Their whole lives. And if they get into narcissistic,
maybe their whole lives,
they don't know, because no one's ever heard them, and listened to them. So it's sort of like, and I tell them, practice this with yourself for a while. And there's even interesting tools online, like all the different feelings people can have, and start fooling with those. And there's many, many different emotions, but it's really about starting there, creating your own tribes of people where you can talk about your feelings and not feel censored. Going to therapy, practicing talking about your feelings, but more than anything else for this person, what your father did to you was not your fault. That's his responsibility. He did not know how to father you, and that is not your fault. It's your bad luck, but it's not your fault.
You're so good, Dr. Ramani. Jeez, it's excellent. It's excellent. We all need to do that every now and then, to just check in with ourselves. I love the idea of doing it out loud, because when I'm in the shower, I do check in with myself, but it's very quick. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. Okay, let's keep going. But if I'm speaking out loud, it forces my brain to slow down and really think about it. Yeah.
In fact, I want everyone right now, sitting where you are, if you can, without getting in trouble. How you do it too. How am I feeling right now? I'm feeling better, because I wasn't feeling good 20 minutes ago. I feel better. Kyle, how are you feeling right now?
I have been feeling great all day, but that actually just made me feel very emotional. I know that's not the best adjective, because it made me realize how much I doubt my own reality throughout the day, without even realizing I'm doing it. And I am the king of pushing down emotions. Oh my God, I'd rather stick with facts than emotions. So that's why I'm emotional, because you're saying, Kyle, just stop and out loud go, yeah, I'm irritated today, or I'm sad today, or I feel like I'm on top of the world today, and I can check in and have that moment more mindfully.
That's my point, because I do feel better, because I just actually had a very uncomfortable meeting right before the call, and I was actually really upset after that meeting, and I started talking with you, and I'm like, I love talking to Kyle, and I love, I love having these kinds of Q&As. I feel better. And me saying that allows me also to give permission to that irritable, angry feeling I had before. And I was so used to a lifetime of relationships where people saying, oh, come on, you don't have any right to feel irritable after that. It wasn't that big a deal. It was a big deal to me. I was irritable. Don't you dare take that away from me.
So good. I hope everybody participated in that exercise. This next question says, Dr. Ramani, how can one tell narcissistic grandiosity from psychotic or delusional grandiosity? Thank you.
That's a great question. So psychotic or delusional grandiosity is not going to come out of anywhere. Somebody who's engaging in, like, I don't know if this person who's sharing this question knows the person or doesn't know the person. Like, is this their first encounter with them or not? Look at the content of what they're saying. Delusional grandiosity is, I'm going to build a spaceship to Mars. I've just written my first screenplay and I'm going to win an Oscar, even though I've never written a word on paper. It would be things like, I just started this sales job, and I'm sure I'm going to be clearing $1 million in sales by the end of the year. Like, you're almost like, that feels really out of control. I mean, sometimes it's so obvious that a delusion is a complete break from reality. The spaceship to Mars, or, I'm going to invent, I'm going to raise a whole herd of unicorns, or something really bizarre. But even some things that are delusional are things that are so off the pale, and they're promises that could never be kept, that you're saying, what is this? This does feel delusional. Whereas your traditional grandiosity can still feel really amped up. Like, I have no doubt that by the time I'm 27 years old, I'm going to have made $10 million. Maybe they will. I suppose it's true, but it's a grandiose statement to be making these proclamations. So, you almost want to look at how embedded is this in reality? Is it even completely devoid of reality? Or is it something that could happen, but it's such a long shot? The long shot stuff is more of the grandiosity, the Superman thing. And I always say grandiosity is when somebody ties a cape, ties a towel around their neck and walks around and says, hey, I'm Superman, or I'm Superwoman. It's just, it's not, but it's a bit much. And it's, nobody knows this better than I do. When it's very dismissive, it's also grandiosity. So, but I don't know that I'd call that delusional. Some people could make the argument that all grandiosity is delusional because it's not based in a reality. I tend to reserve the word delusional for something that a person may actually believe is true, but the person's overstating it. But I'd really say things that aren't really, really bizarre or unnatural probably just fall under the rubric of traditional grandiosity. And while traditional grandiosity can be entertaining for a few minutes or maybe even an hour or two, after a while it really can get exhausting, because it really takes you off the string of the conversation that's based in real life.
Yes. This next person says, after watching Dr. Ramani's videos, I felt like a light went off in my head and everything made more sense and less sense at the same time. Less sense because I felt like I'd met and known and put my faith in an astounding number of narcissists. It just feels absurd that so many people I know and love share so many of these patterns. Then I wonder, could it be something wrong with me? If you wake up one day and everyone else seems like the enemy, maybe it's just you. Dr. Ramani?
So I actually admire this person for having this level of insight of saying, okay, do I need to take responsibility? Here's the challenge. Toxic people tend to cluster together. So if you come from a toxic family, there's probably like that whole bunch of them kind of stuck together because they all enabled each other. I am sure and hope, I can't say I'm sure, I would hope that this person, that if they dug into their family, say, there's a cousin that actually was a lovely person, there's a sister that I actually do like or something. Don't be surprised though when you see the toxic post. Toxic people tend to be pack animals. They do tend to kind of hang together because they feed off of each other, they enable each other, they empower each other. And so that is it is not unusual for, especially if they have a shared belief system of some kind, family, or I don't know what, a cultural or something, that can also create that happening. And then what you might have too, Kyle, is if you have a system, let's use a family system as an example, with one very strong narcissist at the center of it, everyone around that person may be that person's enablers. And that's why everyone in that system can feel really toxic. Because if you walk on in as sort of a truth telling person and saying, like, this is a mess, do you realize that? And everyone is sort of pushing back on you. You become the bad guy, and everyone's sort of participation in this almost seemingly cult-like structure can really, make you feel as though you're the one who's got something wrong with you. What I would say to someone who says that, pay attention to what happens when you try to meet people outside of these networks. If you try to spend time with other people who are sane and empathic, and they self-regulate and they self-reflect, and when you're with them, are you thinking they're narcissistic too? Or are you saying, no, I'm actually really enjoying my time with this person? And it goes back to the whole, Maya Angelou statement about, like, people never forget how people may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And because we don't pay attention to how we feel, we don't always pay attention to that. But I always tell people, I say, please, after you leave an interaction with someone, can you please reflect on how you felt after being with them? Yeah. Because if you feel better, stronger, not necessarily puffed up, but like more curious about the world, more growth oriented, lighter, just happier, you just learned something. I'm going to be frank with you. I'm going to use you as an example, and I'm not blowing smoke. I love seeing you. Like 5 minutes before, we were just chatting away. I feel better after I see you. Like I enjoy seeing you. I enjoy seeing the other member of the team, Bridget. Like I enjoy you. And so that tells me something about, I have someone I that's dear to me. I also know what I feel like after I've been with toxic people. And I was with toxic people today, and I was depleted after that. And so pay attention to that difference. If all I did was base my day on the morning, I could have said everyone I know is toxic. But here we are, and I talked to some amazing students today. I'm talking to you. You know the difference. And just because they hang out in a pack doesn't mean it's you. It's because they hang out in a pack. So
yeah, right. Excellent. And I echo your sentiments. Great question and great insight from that last participant. This person says, and thank you for your very sweet words, Dr. Omi. I feel the same way. This person says, I was convinced that my friend is a narcissist, and I was curious to see her reaction to your videos. So I casually showed her a couple, and she seemed to go red in the face. I've been keeping my distance, but I think she seems to have changed overnight. It's almost like she's forgotten what she used to say and used to be. Now I'm not sure if she was a narcissist to begin with, and I'm so confused. Dr. Romney, what are your thoughts?
Is this person saying that their friend is now behaving in a more nice manner?
That's the way I read it, yeah.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, great video, Dr. Romney.
Listen, I think that I talk sometimes about what I call sort of subclinical narcissism. These are the people who are sort of the annoying narcissists. They're superficial. They hijack the conversation. Everything's about them. They talk about their vacations. They can be dismissive of other people. They might be snobby. They might sort of be very validation seeking. They're annoying, and they seem immature. Okay. In this person's case, they may have shown this video to the friend, and the friend, though, if the friend was really a full-on, like, more problematic narcissist, would have become very defensive and become angry at the friend, like, how dare you show me this, and called her a few choice names. The fact that her friend was willing to watch it, turn red in the face, which seems like some level of acknowledgement, and has kind of attempted to change her behavior, to me, that's actually a really good prognostic sign.
That's excellent. Really great. And thanks for spreading Dr. Ramani's content with other people. This person says, so many are saying that the term empath doesn't really exist, that there's no research behind it.
Right.
I guess this isn't a question. They're just saying, I'm glad that you're doing this. But is there research behind empath? And can we call ourselves or somebody else an empath?
I don't disagree with this person, is that this is still an area that's kind of evolving. And in terms of hardcore peer-reviewed empirical science, we're sort of coming up short there. There are scales out there like the Toronto Empathy Scale and some well-validated scales in the clinical research and in the social and personality research that are used to measure empathy. But I don't think they're designed to measure sort of empathy off scale, if you will, like what we'd see in a person who is an empath. I sometimes get a little concerned that people might over-identify as an empath, which then becomes a justification for why they're sort of allowing a narcissist to get away with so much rather than setting a boundary. So they'll say, I can't help it, I'm an empath, versus, girl, you got to set a boundary.
Okay.
Like we got to get you out of this mess. And so I don't want people to hide behind it, but I do think that there are people out there, and I think some of this can sometimes be this can be a byproduct of having been raised in a home where you have invalidating parents. Interestingly, those folks can get hypersensitized and almost be overly sensitive to the temperature in the room, and then overcompensate for that by over attending to everybody in that situation. My concern, though, on the other side is this, Kyle. I don't want us to ever pathologize this idea of being an empath. And I think the area of the DSM where that sometimes happens is people who have a disorder called dependent personality disorder. And people with dependent personality disorder can be over yielding, offer to do the things that nobody else wants to do because they're so afraid of being left to hold the bag and take care of themselves. And I don't think that's what mobilizes an empath. I just think empaths feel very, very plugged in, but there's a risk of potentially pathologizing empaths using that kind of a label. So for now, I think it suffices to say that I think empaths are people who might be sort of, sometimes they're called highly sensitive people, but they're people who really are very tuned and tapped into the emotional temperature of a room, sometimes to a fault if it results in them sort of undervaluing their needs in the favor of overvaluing someone else's and not being able to monitor whether or not they're being taken advantage of. But I agree with the person who says that. This term is still sort of looking for scientific validation, and it's not there yet.
On this same topic, another member just asked that there is this term dark empath going around now. It refers to the idea that some empaths are secretly narcissistic and that they are the most dangerous people of all. In other words, these, quote, kind-hearted people are actual sociopaths using cognitive empathy to meet their needs. Can you speak a little bit about that, Dr.
Absolutely. This idea of the dark empath is a very interesting one. And it is, and it comes up in the literature it's hidden in other terminology. Some people will call this somebody as having high emotional intelligence, meaning that there's somebody who can read the emotional situation and work it, and in some cases work it to their advantage. There are also people out there who will call this personality mirroring. Ironically, I was watching an episode of The Office, and it came up there, and it was actually they presented it brilliantly in such a silly show. But it's this idea of, I'm a salesperson, so I'm going to mirror people. I'm going to learn their name. I'm going to look at them in their eye. Kyle, you must be Kyle. Kyle, what a host! You know what? I've wanted to be a host. Could you sit down and tell me a little bit about hosting? And, tell me about, and they're that person. Okay. So the dark empath to me really has the feeling of the kind of greasy salesperson, like gross and like they're just kind of, they're looking through you and they're looking in your wallet. But it is it doesn't feel good. Like, in fact, I see someone dropped a comment that says intrusive. That's actually a really nice word for it. Actually, it's very wise who wrote that comment, because I do agree that it's intrusive. But what is terrifying about it is that they have this capacity to do the intel work. It's not empathy as much as it's almost like a download. It's that they're paying so much attention to you that they're data mining you. They're trying to figure out what cheers them up. What do they like? They're watching you. They're mirroring you in many ways in this sort of terrifying way that they turn around and use against you. And actually, in the sort of love bombing phase of a narcissistic courtship, like in those early days when it's like you fall in this love that you feel like so understood. That's often where the dark empath is at their best, because they're literally learning how this person ticks, and they're mining all of their vulnerabilities to put in their back pocket to use against them down the road in an argument to hurt them. Like, they're that good.
But how would I know that I'm just not in a relationship with somebody who's extra caring and really accommodating, as opposed to somebody who has malicious intent?
Because the dark empath cracks. Okay.
Oh.
And you'll see the cracks in things like they'll lose patience very quickly. There are times that they are breaking a sweat trying. They're sprinters. They're not marathoners. So they're going to get in there and they're going to get as much as. That's why they're saying it's a great sales technique, because they just want to separate you from your money kind of quickly. But if they're in your life, like a lot of people run into their dark empaths at work. You know, these are the people they see hustling the bosses and the management and the clients and whatever. If it's in your life, pretty soon in, you're going to see they'll lose patience. The trick in a personal relationship is you're like, no, but they're so empathic. So the fact that they just lost patience is because they're stressed. So you find yourself justifying the cracks in their armor. And that justification is the glue that keeps people in relationships with narcissists. And people who are highly empathic are the most vulnerable to justification. So the dark empaths get away with it because they get it right about 80% of the time, and the other 20% is overlooked in the name of a justification because they seem to so get it. But if you can really see it as sort of the greasy salesman or saleswoman, then you start, because anyone who approaches me like that, I shut down, because I know they're playing that dark empath game. I'm actually looking for someone who's a little bit sloppy and their files are falling out of their arms, and I'm like, you're my person, you know?
Hey, I know if anybody ever is interviewing with Dr. Ramani, you need to come talk to me first, because I will tell you exactly what she's looking for. I know. I actually got an email from someone the other day. They're like, I just wanted to compliment you and Dr. Ramani, but I'm not going to compliment too much because I know Dr. Ramani wouldn't like that.
It's true. It's absolutely true. Because I'm so grateful, but I think that there is that sense of so many of us, though, we fall for it because we want to be seen, and nobody has really ever taught us what really being seen looks like.
Don't we though? And I have to ask the question, what does being seen look like?
It's quieter. You know, it's not so performative. You know, it's very quiet. It's a lot more quiet. In fact, people who are getting to know you, they actually make a few mistakes, and they're like, wait a minute. You said you were born in New Jersey, right? Not like, yeah, so I know like that part of New Jersey's got some great parks. Like, they've always got the answer. I'm sorry, it feels a little creepy. The dark empath is very creepy. But the person who asked that question brought up a very important point, which is this idea of cognitive empathy. I'm a very anti-cognitive empathy person. And cognitive empathy is it's what I call the person who can cry when they're watching a movie, but can't show kindness to somebody who's actually in their life. It's the person who is able to think like, I see right now that person seems sad and angry because of what I said. So the correct reaction is for me to apologize. It's very, very like sort of strange and robotic and cut off and textbook. So they're able to make an argument like, I showed you empathy. I apologize. I asked you how you felt. But it's like they got this empathy in a box and they sort of opened it and they're like, okay, I'm supposed to do this and this. And so the dark empath it feels very formulaic and robotic.
Yes. Love this next question. How do you handle a narcissist smear campaign?
That's a tough one. People who go through narcissistic smear campaigns, it can actually feel almost traumatic because you can see people you believe were your friends, were your family, and all of a sudden they're not taking your calls. When they do, they're very critical of you, and it's devastating. Like someone dear to me is actually going through one right now, and I mean I'm feeling it in my chest for this person. It is awful because these are people he was convinced loved and cared about him, and somebody got in there and did like a absolutely horrific smear campaign. And I've seen this over and over with clients. You see this happen in divorces. You see this happen when a family member dies. And how do you manage it? Number one, I have to say, and I know I often give this as feedback, but here it's critical, is getting into therapy with somebody who gets it. Because if you get into therapy with somebody who gaslights and says, well, come on now, everybody can't be against you, get a new therapist. Because yeah, everybody can be, it can happen. Like that can really, really happen. But I also think it becomes important that I hope everyone has at least one person, their person, who does hear them, so they can feel like they're not losing their minds. But if you have a narcissist in your life, you almost have to recognize that, yeah, these flying monkeys are the people that the narcissist recruits to do their bidding.
Mhm.
And they're able to convert over to their way of thinking. One way I've put this to other people is, you know what, though? There's an upside to a smear campaign, believe it or not. And here's what that upside is. And somebody's asking, what is a narcissistic smear campaign? A narcissistic smear campaign is when a narcissist reaches out to other people you have in common. It could be family members, fellow co-workers, friends, other people you have in common. And there might be a falling out in your own relationship with the narcissist, and they will either spread a rumor, tell a bunch of lies, do something to diminish or destroy your reputation to those people. And then you lose people in your life who you once thought were people who believed in you or who supported you. But this is what I'm saying is the bizarre upside of a smear campaign, okay? Because I know it's nothing but trauma and loss, is that you actually get a very good lens in to who you can finally get rid of yourself. This becomes cleaning house for you. People will say, listen, what are they supposed to do? Somebody came up to them and said all this terrible stuff. I said, if they knew you well, they would not have believed them. The
That's what
only
I'm saying.
person, the only people that the narcissist can get over to their side of things are people who are gettable. And people who are gettable never had your back in the first place. So bye-bye. And
Mhm.
it is painful to do it, but you can do it in a definitive way and say,
Mhm.
these people were willing to even entertain the nonsense this person was saying. You know what they should have said? I'm going to go, I'm going to have to go, I'm going to call them because this is not who the person I know. And then call you and say, listen, I want you to know that your brother just called me and said all of this stuff about you that I know is not true. That is
Mhm.
very different than maybe this isn't. I think that this whole idea of a narcissistic smear campaign is part of a strategy that narcissists use called triangulation. They attempt to create chaos by sharing gossips and innuendo and all of that. And then the only person who holds all the power in that situation is the narcissist, because they're the one who's been spreading all the gossip. So to
Mhm.
break that, first of all, anyone who is willing to believe that nonsense, you either put them at a very long arm's length or dump them all together. And it really becomes a wake-up call to cultivate new sources of support, as hard as that is. But understand this is trauma and there's a lot of grief. And it's not the grief of one loss. It can often be the grief of dozens of losses.
Someone asking a follow-up question: what if the flying monkeys are your children?
Oh, that happens all the time. It happens
Yeah.
all the time. It happens in divorces where one parent is willing to, or another family member is willing to recruit the children to do this. And honestly, in that case, I wish I had something sunnier to say then. That could be sort of almost the ultimate loss of all. Because again, if those children were convertible, and kids can be converted by stupid stuff, like the parent was willing to buy them a car or pay their rent or buy them a condo or whatever, that they're able to convert the child on that basis, that there's probably very little you can say to that child, if anything, to sort of win them back over. And I'll often tell parents, who are fine, and it's often parents who find themselves in this situation, is all you can do as a parent is be available to them in a way that's healthy for you. But then you really need to double down on the grief work, because it's quite possible. And Kyle, I hate to say this, I've worked with numerous clients who lost their children forever in this way.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sugarcoat this stuff. I'm really not, because it's very, very real and it does happen.
And I appreciate the non-sugar-coatedness of
Mhm.
it. That is why we are here. Dr. Ramani has an excellent series. I believe it's titled Navigating Narcissism, but every session is about the relationships, different relationships you could have in your life, from parents, siblings, friends, coworkers, and how to navigate those narcissistic relationships. And one of the options is the radical acceptance and or completely cutting off ties. And it is a difficult conversation, but it's one that needs to be had, and we're having it at MedCircle. So make sure you put that on your future watch list, navigating narcissism with Dr. Ramani. Let's go to another question. This person's asking, Dr. Ramani, does narcissistic personality disorder have a genetic component to it?
It's a very good question. As of now, the research is suggesting probably not. Now, where the genetic association may end up coming up is that one of the big mistakes we make in how we think about personality disorders is we divide them into these discrete labels: borderline, narcissistic, antisocial, and so on. These may be artificial divisions to some degree. And so this sort of antagonistic, poorly emotionally regulated style, there's actually some evidence that some of that is heritable. Some of the work on borderline personality, for example, is suggesting more and more heritability. But when it comes to narcissistic personality, less of that has been shown. It could very well be that some of the qualities in narcissism, particularly the issues around empathy and the issues with not being able to manage emotional regulation and the impulsivity, those may have heritable components. So it's possible that some of the subcomponents are what's inherited, and then the rest of life sort of fills out the rest of the holes. So this is definitely an area that's evolving. And so the few studies I've seen sort of talk about these components of what makes up narcissism rather than the larger trait of narcissism itself.
That makes sense. This person says, hi, Dr. Ramani, hearing you is so healing. I absolutely agree.
Thank you.
My question is how to deal with survival guilt when you leave your narcissistic family, narcissistic father, enabler mother, but your youngest siblings are still living in that toxic environment. I see the depression and anxiety in all of them, but they seem stuck.
It's such an excellent question. So first of all, I would say to this person, the sacrifice of you is not going to save them. Now it's just one more person sinking with the ship.
I got to write that down. The sacrifice of you cannot save them.
No. So, but in fact, if anything, this person becoming stronger means that she can be a safe space to receive them once they come out on the other side. I would say for her to do her best to try to keep communication with them that's not triangulating, that's one-to-one. Like, let's say she has a sibling that's 16 years old or something like that. Stay in touch through text or whatever. Try to create time and space for them, give them an opportunity to talk about their emotions. But here's the thing. There's no coming out of the legacy of a narcissistic parent without scars. It doesn't happen. Whether you come out full of anxiety, full of self-doubt, negative mood symptoms, whether you come out dysregulated and have trouble with drugs or alcohol or spending or food or whatever, nobody, and some people end up narcissistic themselves, nobody comes out of this unscathed. But this idea of I think that nobody ever should feel like they need to be a punching bag for somebody else's narcissism. That's unacceptable to me. And so you going down with the ship makes no sense and doesn't protect your siblings. However, the survivor guilt that you're experiencing is very, very real. It's actually something we often see in post-traumatic survivors as well. When there's been a trauma and some people live and some people die, let's say in an accident or something like that, that's a very real phenomenon. And it becomes very important to do your ongoing therapeutic work with somebody on the sense of survivor guilt you're experiencing, because a good therapist will be able to keep shaping this thought that you sinking in that ship with them benefited nobody. And if anything, what this person has shown by leaving that system is modeling for those siblings that it's okay to leave.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that reminder. This person says, what can you say to a narcissist when you want to leave the marriage and they just cannot imagine why? Or do you think they really do know? How do you explain to them that it's because they are narcissistic?
You don't explain. That's number one. There's two. There's something you never do with a narcissist. You don't explain and you don't defend, because you're wasting your time and now you're going to escalate into some huge battle that there's no point of. You don't need to give an explanation and they're not going to hear it anyhow. If you want to give them something, So they don't feel like you're just packing up and leaving, one night like you claim to be going to the corner store to get a pack of cigarettes. I can go with that, but whatever you say, they're not going to listen and they're not going to change. So if you can, I would say whatever reason you give them, frame it from the point of view of you. Say, I'm leaving because this isn't working for me anymore. I feel like it's, I don't even want to get into the specifics of it, but it's no longer working for me. So I'm out. They're never going to get down with it and agree. They're never going to take ownership. If they were willing to take ownership, you'd probably still be in the marriage. Okay. And so I would definitely say that don't explain if we could get back all the human hours wasted explaining things to narcissists, we could probably dig our own Grand Canyon. I'll be honest with you. It's so many people waste time and they feel like maybe they'll finally get it because now I'm leaving. No, they're not going to get it. So don't waste the time. And I would say really just keep it simple. I'm leaving. This is no longer working. I'm sorry for both of us. Thank you for, thank you for sharing this part of the journey with me. Peace out.
Peace. Dr. Ramani has a phenomenal book, Should I Stay or Should I Go? She also has another one called Don't You Know Who I Am, both tackling the subject of narcissism. If you go to medcircle.com, click on Our Doctors, and then go to Dr. Ramani's MedCircle page, you can see all of her books available for sale. It's a great reads if you're interested in this topic. This person asked Dr. Ramani, how do you know the difference between someone having a different perspective from you and someone who is gaslighting you? I need to know this too.
It's a very good question. A person who has a different perspective than you is also able to coexist with your perspective. Say, I completely understand why you would feel that day. I really, really do. My reasoning for feeling differently is this. However, I also want to let you know that I respect your point of view on this as well, versus that never happened. I never said that. You're absolutely wrong. What is wrong with you? That's gaslighting. Gaslighting is meant to not only diminish the other person, but deny their reality altogether. You absolutely can have a different perspective with someone and do it respectfully. Say, I have to tell you, I come at this from a different point of view, but now that I've heard your point of view, it's really interesting for me to think about it. I still don't agree with it, but I can understand it. I can understand why you hold it. And I hope we can sort of respectfully coexist. That, to say that you can also even still to say, even that I've heard your perspective, I still don't agree with that, and still be able to be respectful of the other person and say, I hear you. I hope you can hear me. And I'm glad we were able to, because you as a human being, I value, and I want us, because we're never going to agree on everything. And so I absolutely think it can be done, but that requires two people who feel like they can maintain their reality, who feel solid in their reality. I think then you can do it. But so many people are so fragile. And listen, what's the goal of gaslighting? Gaslighting is designed so you can control another person. That's what it's about. So the person who gaslights you, they have an entirely different agenda. This isn't just a mere difference of opinion.
Excellent. This person says, I was in a relationship with a narcissist. I recognized it was unhealthy. I went no contact. I know it's the right thing. Why do I keep thinking of them? Why can't I just release the relationship?
It takes a minute. I think that, I always say that when we leave from healthier relationships that just couldn't work, maybe for logistical reasons, they're so much more easy to release than the problematic ones for the reason of something that we call trauma bonding. And trauma bonding is like the super glue of relationships, because what happens in a relationship with a narcissist, these are often trauma bonded spaces. And what that means is that in the trauma bond, the person is, they learn in childhood, usually because they had a narcissistic or at least an invalidating or gaslighting parent. In childhood, they learn that love is abuse, love is chaos, love is invalidation, love is rejection, love is anxiety. So when they fast forward to adulthood, when you get into an adult relationship that's characterized by confusion or invalidation or anxiety, it feels like an almost primal kind of love. Your adult thinking brain then says, no, this isn't good. But there is this deeper part of you that's like, this is magnetic. So you justify it. For years, you're like, they didn't really mean it. They're really stressed. I must have misheard them. I mean, we all know the list of justifications. One day, it may feel like too much. And then this dissonance kind of breaks and you don't justify it anymore and you're out. But that primitive primal trauma bond still draws you in. It's like an undertow. You keep getting pulled into it. It's not uncommon in a narcissistic relationship, especially after it's ended, for a person to experience something called euphoric recall, where they only remember the good stuff. But we did get along and they got me. And I remember this time we laughed and this and that. And then to that end, actually, one of the interventions I give to people is to write a list of every bad thing that happened in the relationship, including every bad thing they said. The reason I have them do it is not to be mean-spirited, but sometimes in the midst of this sort of getting sucked back into that trauma bonded feeling, getting sucked back into this idea of this cognitive dissonance, this idea of like, this confusion when something is bad for you, wanting to make it work, the euphoric recall. If you can look at the list and says, okay, did this at that and did this and said this to my mother, like, oh, no, 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 no. And then you say, I can't do this. But when you're in the midst of that, for example, euphoric recall, you can't come up with that list. So you need to write it down, get a friend to help who's like, oh, I'm happy to add 27 to that list. Yes, thank you, Beverly. I call it the ick list. That's exactly what I call it. And so that is actually a very useful tool. And although I feel like it's a little bit petty, it's petty, but it can save people. So I think that that's a big piece of it. I said to many people, my goal for survivors of narcissistic abuse is something that we often don't put out as a goal in mental health, which is indifference. When I can get a person to utter indifference about that narcissistic relationship, that's often where they can finally release it, where they don't care if that person lives, they don't care if that person dies, they don't care if that person remarries, they don't care if that person wins the lottery. They're like, I just don't care anymore. Like, I'm good. Like, this is done. And that moment is a good moment because it's in some ways, if you feel too positively towards them, you run the risk of the undertow again. So I'm trying to keep you out of the water. Like, let's just stay on very far, like way off the beach and see it from that perspective. But that's actually a good goal in a narcissistic relationship where it's still not floating through your mind. You will get there, but it is grief work. It is grief work. It takes a minute to let it go.
Thank you for all these great questions. I'm literally taking notes. This is awesome. This next person says, my mom is a verbally abusive, raving, alcoholic narcissist. I'm 29 and finishing up school, and I'm living in her house temporarily. I can't stand her unprovoked narcissistic rage attacks. Any tips?
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, you are going to have to out Dalai Lama the Dalai Lama on this one in terms of getting so serene and centered. I want this person to know who wrote this question. Please understand that this is actually not good for your health. So you do need to get out of this as soon as you can, because as much as I can give you techniques to withstand this, I feel like I'm giving you short-term kinds of techniques. These are not meant to be the rest of your sort of life when it's done. So the first place is what I said from the beginning, at the very beginning of this session, is you've got to manage your expectations. Mom is an angry person who lashes out with anger because she's angry at the world. She's angry at life. She is forever a victim. She always feels let down by everything and everyone, and she just spouts it out everywhere. And alcoholism and narcissism are often quite highly correlated too. And so is to manage those expectations and realize that this is built into the model, that's what mom is going to do. It's almost like living next to the train tracks. You know that about 6 times a day, a train is going to go hurtling by your bedroom door. The second is that radical acceptance. Your mother's never going to change. So you don't wait for that day. It's going to be different. The next, don't engage. When she goes off on one of her rants, try to go what we call gray rock, which means to be as boring as a gray rock, disengaged, completely almost inaccessible, like uninteresting. This may lead her mom to rage more because she's probably looking for a fight. Don't give it to her. Just don't engage. The next, don't defend and don't explain what I just said. If she's like, why, what? Don't explain. One-word answers, brief answers to get you out of there. And don't defend yourself because she's not listening. And honestly, she's baiting you and she's looking for a fight. And then don't personalize. It is so easy to personalize what's coming out of their mouth. It feels personal. Someone's yelling at you. That feels very personal. But don't personalize it. She's the one who's acting a fool, not you. And so, again, think of you, where you're living now with your mother is like living next to a train track where the train goes by your house 6 times a day, 3 times in the middle of the night, and the train engineer is a little bit of a sadist, so he hits the toot toot whistle at the 3 in the morning drive by on the house. And so, but the train engineer doesn't know you. That just seems to be the point on the train ride. He always seems to do that. So if you can get your head around that, like, I live in a noisy train track house, at some level, you go into this radically accepted space of like, I know this is temporary. I need to get through school. I can do this. A lot of mindfulness, meditation, breathing, all of these things can help you center in the face of this. But girl, I'm telling you, in the long term, this ain't going to work. Being around this level of toxicity is going to make you sick. Get your degree, go out there, set the world on fire, but get out of this, because it will break you. And as much as I wish I could train people to stay in this unscathed, I can train people to stay in this, but their health will start to take a hit.
Well said, Dr. Ramani. What are the things to keep in mind to not let our next relationship be affected negatively because of past narcissistic trauma?
One thing is, I think everyone needs what we call a washout period. You know, there's a temptation to get into another relationship. Don't do it. I want you to get acquainted with yourself. I want you to do that exercise. Like I said, walk around yourself, ask how you're feeling, say it out loud. Like, you need to do you. In order to sort of release those old narcissistic relationships that's a few people have asked about, one thing you need to do is start learning to live a little of life on your own terms. And something I often call the crackers in bed exercise. Like, hey, I can eat cookies in bed and get crumbs in the bed, and no one's going to get mad at me. And so live your life for a while. You want to fall asleep with the TV on? Great. If you want to eat, you know, a sleeve of Oreos in bed, not admitting what I did last night, but you can do that, okay? If you want to go and watch foreign films with subtitles to your heart's content and not have someone criticize that, you need to do those things. You have a dream you want to go after without someone saying, well, are you really sure you want to go back to school? You don't need censorship. You need the washout period, and you need to get really reoriented to you, crumbs and all. And then you're going to learn how to hold your space. So when somebody says to you, yeah, I don't know if I don't really like foreign films, and say, well, that's a shame because I really like them. And I'm going to end up, there's something I'm going to watch tonight. Or like, I need that TV off when I need that TV off. As soon as, like, yeah, some of these things are compromises in a relationship. But when somebody's really starting to disrespect you, once you get comfortable with that space for yourself, it tends to feel a bit more jarring, and you might be more willing to push back on it. The other things are that it is going to take you longer to trust. And instead of thinking that's something damaged about you, I hate when people say to me, because I don't agree with this, they say, oh, now that I know all this stuff about narcissism, I feel like I'm cynical. I say, you're not cynical, you're wise. There's a difference, okay? Now you have wisdom that a lot of other people don't have. View it as wisdom. If you do meet someone else and decide to start dating again, take it very, very slow. People who are survivors of narcissistic abuse need a minute for the signals to come in. So if somebody's trying to press the fast forward button, hey, like, let's go on a vacation together. Hey, like, my lease is up. Say, if your lease is up, good luck finding a new apartment, because you ain't moving in with me. And so it's really about watching the pacing. A lot of people, you know what love bombing is now. Don't fall for it. Watch that pacing. Constantly be touching base with yourself. Ensure that you set your goals up in a way that they can sort of take some priority in your life after you shelving your life for so long. Pay attention to how you're treated. The first time you make a justification for this person, take a long step back and pay attention to what that's about. And then the first time you notice a hypersensitivity in a person you're dating in a new relationship, pay attention to that. The first time they get their nose gets out of joint because you say something like, oh, I don't know, like, oh, that's interesting. I thought you were the manager of that branch, and they lose it. They're like, yeah. And you're like, I just didn't know. You're going to, I hate to say it, but you're going to probably have to set your boundaries a lot firmer, harder, and quicker than you ever did before. And so it is what it is. But I do think that that washout period is absolutely critical for you to become acquainted with you and start allowing yourself to honor some of your rhythms for a while so you can keep respecting those rhythms once you get into a new relationship, if you do get into a new relationship.
Want to high five you. I get that. I'm an empathic person to my detriment. My sister is a narcissist, and we have not spoken in years. And I'm going to have to see her at a funeral. I don't understand why I feel so afraid to see her. I feel powerless around her. Can you please give me advice on how to feel more powerful? Thank you.
So again, this goes back to that idea of the trauma bond, especially since this was a sister. This person was a player in this person's life ever since most likely she was a child, is my guess. And so it's very interesting that when we think about the sympathetic nervous system, okay, when we have to face something that frightens us, and a narcissist is one of those things, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. And interestingly, Pete Walker, who's written a lot on trauma, says we also go into fawn. So fight, flight, freeze, and thanks to Pete Walker, fawn. And that paralysis, and I actually have a video on this idea of narcissistic paralysis. Our sympathetic nervous system gets so jazzed up because we're actually kind of scared of this person that our heart is racing. We can't quite catch our breath. We're not physically comfortable. We look and feel like a deer in the headlights, and then we feel like we're paralyzed. Understand that you have to tell yourself, my sympathetic nervous system is going to tell me this is a scary thing. This is a saber-toothed tiger. I got this. A big thing for her to do before the funeral. On that day, I don't know how it's all going to go down for her, but when she knows the moment is coming where she's going to have to face her sister, whether it's in the car, whether it's in another room, to get centered, to breathe, to catch her breath, to say, I know what this person's about. I do not need to engage. I owe this person no explanations, and I only need to get through this day or 2 days or however long it is. Prepare, breathe, center, okay? Don't walk into this unprepared. Then when you're with her, understand your heart's going to be racing, and remind yourself, my heart's going to race, and it's not because she has the power. It's because this stupid sympathetic nervous system is a throwback to when we were just like, we're like a zebra or something like that. Like, it's all good. That's just my body doing its drill, but I can think over this, okay? And then when that day is done, immediately find a way to create some time and space for you by yourself. Ideally, do not stay where she stays. Get yourself a hotel room. Do what you need to do to be separate from her, and then let yourself get rest. That may mean going to bed early. It might mean taking a soothing bath. It may mean talking herself down. But whatever power or control she thinks her sister has is the power or control she is giving to her sister. The rest of it is an illusion. So she's got to keep remembering that. This is a bill of goods her sister sold her. She can give herself a different story.
Excellent. After ending a dating relationship with a narcissist that lied and cheated, how does one learn to trust others as they try to move past? I know we've touched on this a little bit, but
it's a process. I mean, the trust piece is a process. And I think some people get frustrated with themselves and they think, I'll never be able to trust. I'm like, well, give it a few months. I would say sometimes, especially very empathic people, are probably too trusting anyhow. So this may be recalibrating your trusting mechanism a little bit more. And it's okay that this is going to take time. The nice thing in some ways, I'd say this is a positive spin on it. After being through a narcissistic relationship, you may become more discerning. If you meet someone and say, listen, you don't have to give them the whole post-mortem of your narcissistic relationship, but should you down the line meet a new friend or a new partner and say, I need a minute. Like I've been through something and I need a minute. And somebody's like, well, that's ridiculous. I'm not to blame for your last relationship. It's like that old day of the Gong Show where there's that hook, you could pull them off the stage. You just pull them off the stage, like not okay. And so love is patient. And if anybody tries to rush it and is not patient, then that's not love. That is something that's being done on another person's agenda. And so this actually becomes an interesting moment of discernment when you're like, yeah, no, I don't roll like this anymore. Once upon a time, you might have let yourself be rushed. Don't do that anymore. Just the pacing becomes important. And if somebody can't do it at your pace because you need a minute to trust them, and they make it about, well, I shouldn't be punished for your past relationship, you know, that shows a lack of empathy out the gate.
That is a excellent reminder. This person says, my 10-year-old is extremely empathic and can read a room better than most grown-ups. It is endearing and incredible to parent a child who's so emotionally available. However, I can see how being that, quote, in tune with others affects her so deeply. What strategies can I give her that allows her to keep that level of awareness and openness, but protect her from being hurt too often?
So I think that a lot of this becomes an talking with her. I think her daughter has an amazing prescient ability. I think that it probably shows that her daughter's also incredibly bright. And when I say bright, I don't mean just book smart. I mean, there's a real brilliance in these kids who have this incredible empathy. There's an intuitiveness, there's an insightfulness. They sometimes go on to become healers themselves, which is, really sort of a beautiful kind of thing to watch unfold. But I think that it's also, as a parent in this situation, is that you stay in very close touch with your child. That I think this is something that many of us are guilty of as parents, is how much we can't create those moments. They just sort of magically happen. And when you're having one of those moments with your child, when you're having one of those deep conversations, roll it out. Pay attention to her. How are you feeling? How are things going with your friends? If you hear that maybe she's being taken advantage of by a group of friends, instead of bashing her over the head with that, like, I think Mary's taking advantage of you, and say, how are you feeling with this situation with Mary? Can I share with you, I'm hearing that sometimes it's a little bit out of balance, but can you tell me how you feel about it? Instead of saying, Mary's taking advantage of you, which might be a little heavy for her daughter, to feel that she has the opportunity to hear that somebody else sees it, that it may make her daughter feel safe enough to talk about it. Because the ultimate way we can address gaslighting, even in the world at large, because somebody had asked about that before, is that if we can validate enough people in our lives, like, say, the greatest example would be if we see something happen to someone and we step in and say, hey, I just saw that conversation. Are you okay? Because it was hard to watch that happen. And I hated watching you get disrespected like that, but I wanted to make sure you're okay. A lot of people won't even identify it, that they got disrespected. And they'll say, you did see that, and say, yeah, hon, I saw that. In fact, I will tell you right now, I had this experience in a professional meeting, which I've shared with a couple of groups. It happened about 2 months ago. And it was, long story short, but someone very sort of narcissistic behaved very badly. And I felt like I was the stupid one. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so dumb. Maybe I shouldn't even be doing what I'm doing for a living. Like, I go right there because I'm a survivor of all of this. So I very quickly devalue myself. And I was really sad. And I actually, was about to go to bed, and I went and looked at my phone. I'm like, never look at your phone, Romany. But this ended up being divine providence, because somebody who was at the meeting reached out to me. She's like, I've had a really hard time since the meeting. She said, I know how hard you work, and I know how much you were trying to do what you were, I was trying to teach a group of people. And she said, I am so angry at what I just witnessed, and what happened should have never happened. And I cannot believe you were disrespected by that. Kyle, it was like somebody poured water on me, like as a plant. Like, I just needed to hear I wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
And her sending that email with just saying, I saw that and it wasn't okay, and I hope you're okay. That was a huge healing step in me, not gaslighting myself as much, just that one action. And if we could all be that to each other, like, hey, I was just in that meeting and that did not feel okay to me. Let me check in with you. So even using this woman's example with her daughter as a stepping off point, we don't have to say that should have never It's say, are you okay?
Thank you. How to cope with a narcissistic boss. He abuses my drive to be effective and helpful at work, and when I ask for help, he promises additional resources that never materialize. After 2 years of this behavior, I'm exhausted and suffering from anxiety. How to cope with a narcissistic boss.
Okay, so your narcissistic boss, like every other narcissist known to man, is not going to change. Okay, so this is the workplace. Now, if it's a small workplace, you're in a bit of trouble, because that might limit growth and mobility within the position. So it's really that, again, it's awfully simple to say, oh, you just need to leave the job. Not everyone always has that option, especially at this given time in the economy. We go back to the usual tried and true, manage expectations, realistic, radical acceptance, realistic expectations, and all the rest of it. But I would also say to this person, if you haven't been doing it since it's been 2 years, you really want to, is document things. Like, be very, very careful about that you document, you're very clear on what your contributions are, what you ask for, as much as you can with this boss, do everything in writing, but recognize this boss is not going to support you. And given that the anxiety has been increasing clearly over the last 2 years, it ain't going to go anywhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, this situation's not going to change. So then it really does become about finding a mentor, maybe in your industry or whatever it is you do that doesn't work at that company. Talk to someone who works in that space. They may not understand the narcissism piece, but they may understand like what kinds of moves you might be able to make in your industry. Does it make sense to leave? Is 2 years long enough at this job? Is there something else you could be doing? Is there any camaraderie with coworkers that you can turn to? You don't want to end up triangulating and gossiping about the boss. That'll get you nowhere. But where else can you find supports? But the fact of the matter is, this is not going to change. And this boss who doesn't give you the resources and information, it's like, in essence, it's just living in forever this constantly sabotaging situation. But you've got to understand, since it's not going to change, ask yourself, is this the career I want to be in for 20 years like this?
Yeah, absolutely. We have about 15 minutes left. I really appreciate everyone being here. We've had an avalanche of questions, so we're going to get through as many as possible. If you've not downloaded the MedCircle app, you are a MedCircle member. You can have full access to the app. Go to medcircle.com/app or just search MedCircle in the App Store. You can get a lot more from Dr. Ramani on there. This person said, I recently heard about narcissism. My whole life, I always had toxic, narcissistic people choosing me as friends or partners. I can be anywhere, and the most toxic person will come to me and want to ask me something or want to do something with me. How can I protect myself from that?
Well, this person sounds probably so sweet that by the time they get to them, they burned everyone. No one else wants to talk to them, and they're willing to talk to them. So I think that it's part of it is are you very empathic? Are you the person who feels like you just have to keep talking to the difficult person? You've got to learn, to say, I've got to go to the restroom. I'm so sorry, but I need to step away. I don't care if by the time this is done, people think you have some sort of gastrointestinal condition for how many times you think you need to go to the restroom. But you have the right, when something feels like it's sort of, you feel like you're being held hostage in a conversation where it's very unempathic. It's not a mutual conversation. It's one person holding court. You don't like the things somebody is saying. It's totally fine to say, and this is what it's easy way out. Like, you know what? I got to run to the restroom. It was nice to meet you. Have a good evening. Is that if it doesn't feel good, get out of it. Especially if you're somebody who has been preyed upon by toxic people in the past. I will tell you though, too, to be the person who's willing to lay down the boundary against toxic people makes you very unpopular. And you have to actually be quite strong in the face of the enablers and sometimes the gaslighters. Because I've literally been at dinner parties where I'm like, I'm out. Like, before they even served the main course, like, I can't do this. These people are actually, there's a critical mass of difficult people here. I would rather be at home eating like mac and cheese than dealing with this nonsense. And I will whisper to the host and say, sweetheart, thank you so much for having me. I will text you later about this. I got to go. I'm not feeling my best. I tell a white lie to get out, and then I'll get out. Because I have to say that if I've learned only one thing, having a similar experience, having had numerous toxic people experiences, is that there's a certain strength I get from knowing I can set a boundary and get out of a toxic situation. Because that was not a luxury we had as kids, right? If we had a narcissistic parent or parents, we had to sit there and we had to endure it. And that's where we learned to do all the justifying. But as adults, there's a door, here's a hand, there's the handle. Like, we can open it and we can go. And sometimes I have literally been called like, Ramani, like, you're a little difficult. Not, you're a little, and they've called me a few choice words. I said, you can frame me any way you need. Yeah. I will not endure toxic people. If it helps you feel more comfortable to label me, you do you. I can't do this. It's almost like sitting at a table where a lot of people are smoking. It's not, I can't do it. It just congests me and I can't do it. Or if people were doing anything else that I found offensive, I have to leave. And like I said, you're not going to be popular. And sometimes you have to be able to withstand a world full of enablers labeling you as difficult.
You have this vast canyon of knowledge in your head. And
I have a vast canyon in my head. I don't know if it's knowledge.
And there's some clips with knowledge. And it's all around mental health and obviously personality disorders and narcissism. How does Dr. Ramani move through the world with all of this knowledge?
Not always well, Kyle. I'm going to actually give listeners sort of a sober look at this. I have to say that in some ways I know which line to choose at the supermarkets. I'm like, oh yeah, I see narcissist in line 3 and 2 of them in line 5. I'm going to the self-checkout. Like I have sometimes literally been able to sort of assess the situation like, I think it's helped me learn to not engage at certain times and see what's unfolding. I will often, like even back in the day when I used to fly more, like I would even check in with a flight attendant after I'd watched for a difficult interaction. I'd say, are you okay? Like this can't be easy to go through this day in and day out. And I'm amazed at how many times people would say, thank you so much. I said, but I'm telling you now, it's taking more and more of a toll on me. You think it would be less. It's taking more and more of a toll on me to watch these toxic, poisonous interactions, internet trolls, and the way people use, I can't watch the news. I don't watch the news. I try to read it. I try never listen to it. I have become more introverted. I really keep to myself. I'm my world has become quite small because in some ways I'm watching too many people, Kyle, suffer in a very real way. My clients, people on things, I'm seeing some of these comments pop up and the horrific things people are going through. And I'm really angry. I mean, there are days it devastates me to think how much promise we sometimes don't get to see because people got so damn silenced by the narcissists in their lives. And it hurts me. I mean, I don't like it. So I have found myself as somebody who really, I got a cat. I love the cat. So I play with the cat and I spend time with my child and my children, talk to my family, talk to, people I trust, but that I try not to put you can't put yourself in the world because of the pandemic, but I hurt a lot because I see how much hurt is happening. And yet I see how much the world enables this nonsense and I'm angry and I don't like how much time I spend in angry. So I watch things that entertain me. I watch documentaries. I watch silly TV. So, I try to escape as much as I can, but I have to say this was not an easy area to get into. And I see that this isn't an easy way to walk through the world. I don't like being able to see all of this. Does that make sense? It's something I can see. I wish I couldn't see. I'm glad it can keep me safe, but it breaks me every time my clients come in. Beautiful, wonderful people who come in with these stories of narcissistic abuse and they'll leave the office and I'll sometimes just start to cry because I can't believe that it just keeps happening.
Understandable. It's understandable. And you are at the forefront of this discussion and have been for years. And, I don't send you even a fraction of the emails that I get addressed to you, thanking you for everything that you've done. And while that doesn't justify any, emotional times you're having or fear or sadness that you're having, I only say that to let you know that the work you're doing is, I don't even think you or I could comprehend the impact you're making. Because when I get a thank you, Dr. Ramani email, I don't even notice it. I'm just like, yeah, okay, I know. Because it's so much, you've impacted millions of people at this point, millions.
I'm so glad. I'm so angry because nobody's willing to call this out, Kyle. Nobody, like how hard, it's like, we see toxic stuff on a public stage, call it out. You don't even have to, you don't have to be mean about it. But this is not okay. And I'm in rooms of psychologists where they won't call it out. So if they can't call it out, it's hard. It's very, very hard. So I feel it, and I can see what people go through, because there's really no escape, and there's so much grief, and you don't get your childhood back. There's no way to go back and replay it with people who were loving. Like there's so much grief around how would my life have been different if I had parents who saw me and who got me and who kept me safe? How would life have been different? You don't get to find that out. But you know what? This struggle is never futile to me, because I have to tell you, people who survive narcissistic abuse, come sit next to me, because there is a wisdom, there is a strength, there is a seeing it all. And I'll tell you, someone made a comment before, I see dead people. You know what I see? When I go in a room, I see the survivors of narcissistic abuse, and you catch eyes and you're like, I got you. You know, I see you. And I actually try to spend my time noticing those folks rather than noticing the toxic people who don't deserve my damn time.
Absolutely. And everybody listening to this live and with the replay, I watch you guys on social media. I'm very engaged with our audience. We constantly are identifying as somebody that has been abused by a narcissist. And that is true. And that can be the identity. But when you have overcome that, when you have survived the relationship with a narcissist, remember that as well. Because I mean, the comments of people who say, I know myself. I found myself. I got educated on narcissism and I found myself.
And it is amazing. And in that way, like, you got to remember, these are people who are fighting against court systems who can't see it right, law enforcement systems that can't see it right, human resource departments that can't see it right. Every institutional structure pushes back against people who are trying to fight against narcissistic abuse. It's as though somehow the narcissists have turned everyone into their flying monkeys, which makes me feel paranoid, but I know it's not the case. I can't tell you how many people I've helped through divorce cases where they thought, like, this person's a monster, and the judge just didn't see it. And so when the institutions seem to be pushing against it, schools, teachers, you name it, like all the places where doctors, therapists, even where we're supposed to be safe, people aren't. And I just want to tell people, like, you may sometimes think, is this just me? No, it's not you, but you find those healthy people, because once you see you can have that healthy interaction, it reminds you, no, this isn't everyone. Like when I think of the gifts of the magnificent people in my life, friends and some of my family members, I'm like, wow, I mean, this is blessed. The fact that if I can count them on both hands, I'm doing great. And that's how I feel. So, and I know that healthy people are out there because I've experienced them. I'm blessed. I have an amazing therapist, and, you know, and that's something else that keeps me strong. So if you have those places, it makes a big difference.
Dr. Ramani, incredible. I'm going to squeeze in this last question here. For many of us who are not have a relationship or a substantial relationship with a narcissist, we know somebody who is, and this person says, how to help a 20-year-old empath female who recognizes the behavior of the male narcissist, the abuse, the control, but she doesn't have the skill set or critical thinking to get out or modify the relationship. So how should this person help this 20-year-old?
So I think, as always, what you want to do is almost like what we do with people in substance abuse. You never go up to a substance abuse and say you need to stop using drugs. It doesn't work. The same thing here is, instead of saying you need to get out of this relationship, is to talk to her, check in with her, offer her empathy, ask her how she's feeling, and then in a very gentle way, express concern. Say, you know, this thing you had talked to me about in this relationship, I have a little bit of concern. How are you feeling about this? Whatever it is, control or something that's happening in the relationship. And then let her talk about it and say, you know, are you aware that it doesn't have to be this way? And she may or may not be aware of it. And unfortunately, at 20, sometimes these lessons need to get learned. But I will give you an example. I was talking with somebody I work with in the community here in Los Angeles, in the domestic violence community. And I was doing a teaching session for her group last night. She was talking to me about a 16-year-old girl who was in a relationship with a very narcissistic guy who shot her. And she didn't die, but she had, all the red flags were there. And this girl was very empathic and didn't get it, but there was abuse in her family too. So it was almost like it set that trauma bonded tone. But it was all the little things. He would text her morning, noon, and night. He broke her phone in an argument, and he buys her a new one. And she's like, oh, he's a good guy. Anytime a man buys a woman a phone, and not even a woman buys a man, anyone buys someone a phone, they're going to probably try to stalk you. You know, people don't think about that. The find your phone and all of that, like it's the ultimate stalking device. And in a young person, they see it as generosity. They think the good morning text and where are you? What are you doing? Tell me where you are. Send me a picture of where you are. Good night, baby. Are you in bed? They think that's romance. That's actually coercive control. So, I mean, forgive me for being the anti-Valentine, but like the
No,
stuff that we have
that
often
is so good.
romanticized, that's
Yes,
the stuff. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no,
Yeah,
you're just getting me fired up because that is it. And I want people to remember that one line.
mm-hmm,
Romance, coercive control. They are not the same thing. So
mm-hmm,
be very
mm-hmm,
clear about what you're
mm-hmm. Yeah,
experiencing.
yeah.
And I've pushed Dr. Ramani on this topic a lot. And I've said, yeah, but Dr. Ramani, what about this? And what about that? And what about if they do that? And she always brings me back. She goes, Kyle, the signs are always there.
Mm-hmm.
The signs are there. You got to get educated. You got to keep an eye out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody going, are you in bed? Send me a picture. Is that
Mm-hmm.
romance? Is that coercive?
No, that's stalking.
Control?
I mean, like,
Stalking.
a person shows up, they say, let me drive you home from work. Let me drive you to work. Let me pick you here. Let me pick you up there. It's stalking, and we romanticize stalking, interestingly, you know? And so that's the problem, and we call it romance. And so in a 20-year-old, especially when it's someone who's a controlling narcissist, a lot of the patterns that are often romanticized in younger people, and I still think as adolescents, we've got to break those cycles, especially since many times people might have been in a relationship with someone who is very inattentive. They think someone who's hyper attentive, that's love. And I'm like, no, there's a difference between disengaged, there's stalking. Let's find something in the middle. And I think that in the middle is the tough part, but that trauma bond, not having worked through early trauma, is often what gets people stuck in these relationships. To give themselves permission to say, the family I came from was a mess, being told I was not enough and having a rageful mother or a rageful father was unacceptable. That was on them. They did not know how to be parents. This is not a statement on me. To give yourself permission to break that trauma bond, because then and only then will you be able to enter into healthy adult relationships. That should be a required class in high school.
You better save and rewind that and play it back, everyone. Dr. Ramani, always phenomenal. I have chills on both sides of my arms. Fantastic. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We'll have more with Dr. Ramani, and we'll let you go. But thank you, as always.
Thanks.
Remember, whatever you're going through, you got this.